This is no longer just podcast banter. This is turning into a full-blown internal civil war inside the Joe Budden universe, and nobody wants to say it out loud. Because what's really happening is this. Marc Lamont Hill isn't even the main issue anymore. He's just the spark. The real fire is how everybody else is reacting to him. Flip is escalating every episode. Ish is unknowingly fueling the tension by the way he engages. Joe is trying to manage chaos while also reacting to it. And the room? It's starting to feel like everyone is picking sides in a war nobody officially announced. And the craziest part? It's not slowing down, it's multiplying. Let's break it down. There's not gonna be, listen, I'm telling you, there is no version of this podcast moving forward where the Joe Budden podcast has both Marlon, Mark Mitchell, and DJ Akademiks on the same panel, and they don't end up firing shots at each other. Every single episode, it's becoming unavoidable. People keep saying Flip just needs to let it go, but here's the thing. It's not even being received the same way between both sides. Mark's shots land more cleanly, more calculated, more witty, and that's part of the problem. Meanwhile, when Flip responds, he tends to go into full breakdown mode, like long monologues explaining how he feels targeted. And you can feel the room shift when it happens. Energy changes instantly. People start looking around, getting quiet, trying not to engage because they can tell there's real tension under the surface. It's not just entertainment at that point anymore. And Mark? He's not helping the situation either. He keeps interrupting and stepping on Flip's points mid-sentence. That's exactly why you've seen Flip start snapping back with things like "shut the fuck up" during the episodes. At this point, Flip has basically absorbed all the patterns and tactics being used against him on the show. But even with that, he still ends up on the losing end of the exchange most times. And what makes it even more interesting is how the audience reacts differently depending on who is speaking. When Mark says something sharp, people call it clever. But if Flip says the same type of thing in a less polished way, it gets dismissed immediately. And then you've got moments where Mark is defending one perspective passionately on one topic, but completely contradicting that energy in another segment. That inconsistency is part of why Joe himself looked visibly uncomfortable during parts of the discussion. You could tell he wasn't fully aligned with everything being said in that moment. And he even had to step in and separate himself from some of the takes being thrown around. But the bigger picture here is simple. This isn't just playful banter anymore. Every episode is turning into a test of dominance, timing, and who controls the narrative in real time. Flip ends up doing these long breakdowns not because he wants to, but because he can't match the back and forth pace in the moment. So he goes back, replays clips, studies everything, and then comes back with responses after the fact. And even then, Mark is still stepping on those responses too, which keeps the cycle going. So yeah, at this point, it's clear this dynamic isn't cooling down anytime soon. This is exactly why the Joe Budden podcast situation with Marlon, Mark Mitchell, and DJ Akademiks is getting even more layered now, because Flip is starting to compare how the energy is distributed across the entire panel. And listen, he's basically saying, why is it always me and Joe getting this type of pressure? Because when you really look at it, he feels like the same intensity isn't being directed at Ish or Ice or even Parks in the same way. So now it's turning into a fairness conversation inside the show dynamic itself. And Joe, as the showrunner, has definitely picked up on all of this tension too, which is why you're seeing him occasionally fire back at Mark in real time. This is where it gets deeper, because earlier comments suggested Mark was basically trying to take over moments or control the direction of conversations on the show. And then you've got Flip pointing out how apologies or corrections seem to happen in real time whenever Mark interrupts segments, which shifts the flow of the entire episode. But here's the twist. People are starting to compare how Ice moves versus everyone else. Because for the most part, Ice doesn't throw people under the bus when things get tense. Even when he contributes ideas or gets involved in topics, he tends to stay out of the direct firing line. And that's actually making people view him differently in hindsight. Now Flip is looking at all of this and saying, why am I the main target of this energy? Because from his perspective, Mark is only applying that aggressive back and forth pressure to him and Joe, not everyone equally. And that's where the frustration is coming from. He feels singled out in the dynamics. At the same time, Mark is clearly leaning into the audience energy and keeping his approach consistent, regardless of pushback. So what you're seeing now is a clash of strategies, one person trying to manage perception and fairness, and the other just continuing the same aggressive style without slowing down.
And even Joe seems aware that this is shaping how the audience interprets every interaction now. At this point, it's less about individual jokes and more about who the audience perceives as controlling the room. When you constantly have to fight just to get people's attention, listen, that's not a real subscription base. That's not a loyal audience. That's not even ownership of your lane. And I think that's the exact situation Marlon Mark Mitchell is dealing with right now. Because let's be honest, if he truly felt he had a strong standalone audience, he probably wouldn't even need to be on the Joe Budden podcast in the first place. I'm standing on that take. I just don't see Mark still being there a year from now. Either he outgrows it or he leaves once he gets everything he needs from the platform. And Flip? At least Flip is actually trying to push back. He's engaging, he's responding, he's not just sitting quietly. Everybody else? They're not really doing that. And that's part of why you see Joe aligning with Flip specifically when it comes to Mark. But I don't want to drag this too far. I just want to point out what I'm observing, because based on how things are going, this dynamic isn't slowing down anytime soon. Every episode you can feel that tension building all over again. Even in the way they physically sit, it looks like there's distance, like they're not even naturally aligned anymore. It almost looks like a broken formation every time they're on camera together. They can't really hide the energy anymore, no matter how professional they try to act. So going forward, it feels obvious. There's going to be more back and forth every single episode. Now the real curiosity is who sides with whom when it fully plays out. Joe clearly leans toward Flip in these moments, and Ish seems to gravitate toward Mark. But the bigger question is Ice and Parks. Where do they land when things really heat up? Because that's going to shape the entire balance of the room. And interestingly enough, Ice has been appearing to side more with Flip lately, which is something nobody really predicted at first. But if you pay attention, the signs are there. So yeah, I want to know what y'all think about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one.